So like I think I said it, so I'll say it again here. You know, when we look at the first stage of the Lamarim, the very first level of practice, entry level junior school, grade 1, Buddha suggests that we zip our lip and keep our hands to ourselves. You know, control our body and control our speech. Why would we do that? Because he says, everything we think and do and say programs us. He would have liked that phrase, I promise. What am I doing? This is ridiculous. It's not happening. And enter Zoom. Okay. Everything we think and do and say programs us, which means everything we think and do and say using his words sow seeds in the mind that ripens our future experiences. So we create ourselves. So given that the mind is the point, he says what goes in the mind is the real point. But we've got body and speech. We're these very gross beings, and we're really gross. Like we're basically, you know, a few eons ago, it seems, you know, a few eons ago, when our minds were more, there was a human realm before this planet. Of course, it's like science fiction to us with our neuroscientific views. Recording in progress. Minds are beginningless. Minds are beginningless. Minds are beginningless. Minds are beginningless. So delusions are beginningless. And so virtues are beginningless. So humans a name we give to a certain state of mind. Animals are a name we give to a certain state of mind. Hell is a name we give to a certain state of mind. Because all the mind is divided into either negative or positive actions, and then suffering and happy experiences. So that's the realms of existence. It's very practical. And so these experiences have always been there. The human one of the results of the virtuous actions within samsara is said to be sort of the best of a bad lot, you know, because at least you can do something useful in the human realm because they have some access to virtue. But if we look at ourselves, we all know, what does the scientists say? We have 99% the same DNA or something as an ape, you know, whatever. So it's sort of like, and we even referred to as animals, aren't we? We're like a version of an animal. That's how we think in the world. But the eons ago, before this human planet, if minds are beginningless, clearly we didn't start with this human planet. Of course, the science says we do, but not the Buddha. So what was a human realm then? What was a human state of mind? Well, what defines the human state of mind is virtues. Virtues are what distinguish us between an animal and a human is a virtue, is the presence of access to some virtue. So a long time, we're in very degenerate times right now. These bucket loads of delusions. And then bodies that come along with delusions, which is gross bodies. Look at us, you know, a bag of bones. Looking like so what happened was a few eons ago, before this human planet, they never give you very detailed kind of timelines. Human was a much more subtle state. In other words, there were human states where we only access virtue. And so because when we understand the 4 elements, this is the Vajrayana system, when you understand the 4 elements conjoined with our mind, obviously deluded states of mind pollute the wind energies, which then in turn eventually create external environments of really ugly and external gross bodies. So bodies are the manifestation of the karma of all the sentient beings, those bright colored birds, the big apes, the animals, the little bugs, you know, we're all literally the manifestation of states of mind, literally. And our states of mind pollute the wind energies or purify the wind energies. So lots of virtue manifests as a subtle body. So a God realm, a human realm was more like a God realm before this planet, or some point in the past. But there was virtue. God's got no access to virtue. He's got access to bliss. And they tip it down the toilet and end up in the lower realms again. Whereas the human realm, it was, you know, the minds were completely virtuous. And the physical energy was very subtle, like light bodies, basically. And it lasted a long, long time. But gradually, over that period, time started to become degenerate, and the delusions were all there. We're still in samsara, but they were latent. There was no manifestation of attachment and aversion. But gradually, dissatisfaction started to grow. Gradually, attachment started to grow. Gradually, you know, things degenerated, and our minds became then polluted the winds. And eventually, one day, we got born as a human on this planet, looking like a bunch of apes. I mean, look at us, you know. Talk about degenerate times. So given that we've got these gross bodies and we have very many delusions, at least we have access to our virtues, but our delusions dominate. Look at us. I mean, look at attachment. Look at aversion. Look at our energies. You know, they dominate. They predominate. This body is literally the manifestation of attachment. It is literally the manifestation of attachment, this body. What do you think it is? 5 senses. Who grew those? We did, from attachment. So we grew our attachment to the point where we literally shaped. It's like karma's like personal evolution. We caused ourselves to have eyeballs and ears and 5 senses that need to be fed. You know, we created all this from our delusions, from delusions. Attachment created this body. Attachment created this realm of existence. So we're completely dominated by delusions. It created this universe, this human realm, this human body of the 5 senses, and the world is the object of those 5 senses. The one that predominates is attachment. So then it expresses itself through the gross body, through the body, and so we have body and we have speech. At least humans, we have some clever speech. Animals make big noises and try to scare you, They're not very bright. But humans are clever without speech. But look at it, so we vomit out, our words are completely uncontrolled. Completely uncontrolled. Even good Buddhists, we think we're so holy, we're so devoted. Wow, 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 I've been in initiation, I've done this, I've taken vows, and we just vomit. Mindlessly, whatever we think through our mouth, No control whatsoever, not to mention our bodies. Dump on whoever we like, take whatever we want, stick it in the different holes, Body and speech. So the very first level Buddha says, given you're all driven by attachment, honeys, at least control the servants of your attachment, the servants of your mind. Control your body and speech. We must have heard this 4 million times. We don't pay attention. We still vomit out our speech, Uncontrolled. It's very interesting. So Buddha says, first level of practice, so this is what I'm getting at now, the explicit teaching at the first level of practice is, honey child, he says, control your body and speech, because guess what? Doing actions with your body and speech driven by attachment, driven by aversion and delusions can only ripen as your future suffering. So if you've got any self-respect at all, control your body, control your speech. Okay? That's what he's saying. But the implicit teaching here, as we start to understand karma, as we start to apply the laws of karma, we start to notice that it begins to change our mind. We start to become more grown up. Because when we got the very beginning stage is when we believe we're this victim who didn't ask to get born, that God made us, mummy made us, daddy made us, and things happen unfairly, like these little babies, who blame everybody else. Slowly, when you abide by the laws of karma, the explicit teaching is don't kill, don't steal, don't lie, don't harm, because you know what, Robina, you don't want future suffering. So you start to take responsibility and you start to get lessen the grip of ego grasping, lessen the grip of the delusions. That's not the explicit teaching. Meaning you become more content, more fulfilled. You start to realize, beginning to understand dependent arising, that actually whatever you do and you say and you think causes what you become. That's a first example of dependent arising. Cause and effect is karma is a brilliant example of the first level of cause and effect, which we begin gradually to notice as we start to abide by the laws of karma. It loosens the grip of self-pity. It loosens the grip of ego. We start to realize that we are in charge. I am the cause of who I become. So with any semblance of self-respect, who would want to vomit out whatever they feel through their mouth? Who would want to live in the mire of attachment, thinking it's delicious, It's like having one of my friends is a therapist and a Buddhist. It's like having our hands in our own shit, We don't understand because we're so pathetic. We're so overwhelmed by attachment. We think it's nice. We conflate it with love and kindness and goodness, because we have no comprehension of attachment. Aversion is fairly evident that it causes suffering. So at least we try not to kill, But attachment, very hard for us to see. Very hard to see that actions driven by attachment are negative, It's very hard to see how even to identify attachment. We conflate it with love. We conflate it with happiness. That's all we know, because we live in a world created by attachment. So the explicit teaching is control your body and speech, but gradually you start to realize a bit about it. Loosens the grip already of ego grasping. So you're beginning to get an understanding of dependent arising right there at the beginning, which is leading us on the path, So then when we get to the next level, the middle scope, we now start, like a miracle, because we're controlling the servants of the mind, we actually begin to see the mind, which is really quite sophisticated, really quite hard for us to do. Extremely sophisticated level of practice to actually identify the billions of thoughts, and distinguish them, the negative from the positive. We just conflate them, especially attachment. So again, the explicit teaching here is to learn to know about the mind, and then through contemplation, you start to literally work on your mind, lessen the delusions and grow the virtues. But if you can't tell the difference, then you can't practice. You're just pretending. If you sit down and watch your breath, you think you're being holy. No, mindfulness, as Lama Zopa says, thieves need mindfulness. Nothing special about mindfulness. So as we start to learn about the mind, begin to know theoretically the difference between attachment and love, we just slowly start to identify. So again, the explicit teaching here is to stop it, is to attempt to see the disturbingness, the pain of all the afflictions. Anger is easy to see, it's very distressing. Attachment, it's not possible to see. It's not possible to see it causes suffering. We think it causes happiness. So this is really subtle. Begin to see attachment and how it causes suffering. As we gradually learn to subdue our mind because we can't bear the pain, then the implicit teaching is we start to realize this other component of the afflictions indicated by this word delusion. This is harder to see, which shows us that all these emotions, as we call them, attachment, aversion, jealousy, anxiety, are all rooted in being conceptual thoughts. And then we begin to see how the negative ones are, the afflictions are delusional conceptual thoughts. They literally make things up. They use the term, in Buddhist psychology, they use the term superstition. This is exactly another word for delusion. Attachment is a superstition. Based on attachment, the thing that appears to us is so divine. We are literally believing in something that doesn't exist. That's called superstition. So gradually, as we start to control the mind now, and because we're sick of the pain, we then see more subtly how these branch afflictions have the same character as the root affliction, which we're getting to soon, which is mainly talked about at that level, about how it's a misconception. We don't really think about how attachment and aversion are misconceptions. We only hear of that when we get to hear about dependent arising and emptiness. But here we begin to see that, because all the branch delusions are exactly the same. The key function of all the delusions, the root delusion on up, is that they embellish, they decorate. As Lama Zopa says, the delusions decorate on top of what is there. Layers upon layers upon layers of characteristics that aren't there. So then the mind takes over with a fantasy, whether we're attached to cakes or dogs or people or bodies or whatever it is. The object is appearing into us in a really distorted way. But the thing that occupies our mind is all the fantasies that our mind just swims in, this mire of absurd nonsense, self-piteous, totally self-piteous, totally self-centered, totally junky mind, That's the suffering of attachment. And we begin to see that we are living in deluded states of mind. And this is getting us now beginning to get us gradually get to identify the root delusion, how it is the biggest superstition of all, the biggest delusion of all, the root one. It exaggerates the very ontological status itself of the I and everything else. The subtlest one, the hardest one to see. But the path leads us to us. All these steps, amazing, so logical, so organic, one step at a time. I mean, I really think when we hear things like, we hear from these great yogis, we hear Lama Tsongkhapa talk, we hear him talk in bodhicitta terms. I mean, it's just, you can see he's living that way, and it just seems too high and impossible. When you hear them say things like, he said, for example, one of my friends, Jane, said when she first heard Rinpoche teaching, he said something like, if just for a minute we could have a direct experience of the mind of our little pet, our doggy and our pussy, just for a minute, a direct experience of their mind. The suffering would be so unbearable, we'd never want to waste another millisecond of this precious human life. So when we hear that, we think he must be insane. Who can see your little pussycat suffering? The only thing we think of as suffering is when you get hurt. It's the only kind of suffering we see in the human realm. That's why we only have compassion for the poor people and the sick people and the beaten up people. We have no understanding at all of the suffering of attachment. We call it happiness. That's the suffering of change. We have no conception, none whatsoever. Even when we're studying it for years, we're still completely in the thrall of attachment. It's so pervasive, so utter. Forget ego grasping. So to hear that's very shocking. So either Lama Zopa has such a profoundly advanced mind that he can see the ordinary mind of an ordinary dog, or he's making it up. Because we can't believe it. It doesn't seem possible. You look at your pussycat, all you see is a cute little pussycat, so happy. When you see your little doggy, you think it's the cutest thing since sliced bread. I don't know if they say that in America. They say it in Australia, maybe in America too. So it shows and even though we're nice, intelligent people, for me, it just shows how unbelievably subtle delusions are. If Lama Zopa can say that sincerely, what he must be seeing is, it's almost like we must be as blind as bats. I mean, we can't even see suffering in other humans. All we see is the face. And if they look like they're smiling, we think, oh, phew, they're okay, We have no idea what goes on in people's minds. So it really shows how extraordinarily subtle delusions are, and the mind. So it shows how minds are so gross. I mean, Buddha, I think, says you can't really get far until you've got single point of concentration. Forget emptiness, forget bodhicitta. So dependent arising means emptiness. Emptiness means dependent arising. Very simple. When we could start to hear that, we're on the right track. This is why Tsongkhapa says it's like the Lamas and the Buddha, everybody. When we start to realize these two point to each other rather than the opposite direction, Nagarjuna, I think, or somebody, then you're on the right track. So to get this even intellectually is an incredible step. When we hear that something has no intrinsic nature, it means it's a dependent arising. I mean, the simplest word, there are many synonyms for how things don't exist at this subtle level, right? At this primordial level. There are many synonyms. So one is things lack an independent character. Things lack an inherent character. Things lack a self-existent character. Things lack existing from their own side. As Lama Yeshe puts it, things don't exist from themselves. Things don't exist from their own side. Things don't exist independently. Things don't exist inherently. Things don't exist naturally. Things don't exist intrinsically. They are all synonyms. But the one word that seems a bit the clearest is independent. So when you say, the Buddha is telling us that the I, for example, or the computer, does not exist independently of various things. Independent. It doesn't exist independently. So what is that telling us? Guess what? That it exists dependently. It's the simplest way to put it, because independent is opposite to dependent. So dependent arising means things exist dependently. And emptiness means they don't exist independently. So if you hear that, it makes sense that there's a flip side of the same coin. We wouldn't necessarily know that inherent means independent. We wouldn't know that intrinsic means independent. We wouldn't know that existing naturally means independent. We have to learn it. It's a particular language in this philosophy, right? But independent is the best one, the simplest. The three levels of how things exist interdependently. Things exist in dependence upon causes. Right now, look at it. We don't believe we're made of, we know we're made of causes, but not me. I'm mummy, daddy, God, everybody else is all their fault. We have this sense I'm set in stone. It's completely gut level. Your mother doesn't teach you to feel like that. You brought your own ego with you. You believe you're an innocent victim. It's not fair. Bad things shouldn't happen. Only good things should happen. This is completely how I feels, which means we believe there's an independent I there, meaning an I that's independent of causes from in here. So the first level, dependent arising, the first level at which I exists in dependence upon whatever is causes. And already, like I said before, it starts to loosen the grip. Pathetic self-pity. You realize that you are the fruit of your causes. Next level, we really start to look into emptiness. We think about that the one we contemplate on is how I is existing, is empty of existing independently of the parts, of the bits and pieces. So then we think, well, yeah, sort of, okay, all right, yeah, but we don't think that. What it says, we either think that there's a little I in there that is independent of the parts. It's like the owner, separate, independent. A bit closer to maybe there's sort of various nuanced meanings about this, but I'm sort of mixing them a little bit. There's a very strong feeling of I, this sad, very self-piteous, very kind of self-piteous kind of I. It's not a happy I at all. By definition, it doesn't feel happy. The miserable, sad, poor self-pity I that's badly done by. That's how I feels. And it feels like it's this owner of the nose, the feet. There's I, and then there are the bits, the boss. We believe that utterly, utterly, utterly. What it says, there is no I. There is no peace. There's no peace called I that's separate from and independent of the other bits and pieces. Can't be. How silly. One logical example, for example, would be, as Lama Zopa says, if there were an I that's independent of the rest of the bits, and and Nina says, Robina, I don't like your nose, then I'll say, how dare you insult me, Nina? And she will rightly say, no, Robina, I didn't insult your eye, I insulted your nose. We would laugh. But it's right. And if there were a little owner in there that isn't the same as and is separate from and independent of the nose, then indeed the little eye would go, oh, phew, I'm glad Nina didn't insult me. Poor nose just got insulted. That's logical. But we don't think so. We're puzzled when we hear it. The other mistake is we think all of me is I. There's one big kind of as many. So then this is not viable either. As Lama Zopa says, the I, the label I, can't be the base. The I is not the same as the parts. If I, and so that's why they talk about this logical argument called one and many. If something exists as either one thing or more than one. So if you say I is my nose, think of this. Then that means I and nose are synonymous. You wouldn't see a difference. It'd be exactly the same. Well, what about your ear? Oh, well, my ear's my eye as well. Okay, then you got another eye. And my knee is my eye. Okay, got a third eye. It's just ridiculous. These are logical arguments they say we need to use. We just laugh at them. It's silly, Why? Because we so utterly believe there is an I that's the boss or an I that's oneness with. They're the two things we have to argue with in order to conclude that I doesn't exist, is empty of existing like that. But there is an I. That's the tricky bit. but not, you can't, it's not this. I is the name. This is the one, the third one, the final level of dependent arising, the subtlest, is the conclusion you come to that I is a name. Microphone is a name. It's imputed by our mind on the appropriate parts. And the name you give to the parts that are appropriate, this is the crucial point. When you first establish things exist conventionally, the appropriate parts for the label microphone, you can't just say, oh, there's an ooh-ah. It's got to fit the definition. You've got to first define it. You've got to first establish it as existing. So we establish, that is a flat-bottomed clay container that holds my tea. We establish that conventionally, and now we have to establish how there can't be there an inherent cup, an inherent holder of tea. But chucking out the fact that there's no inherent holder of tea and recognizing that holder of tea is simply the name we give to these parts, it has to be a valid basis. You can't just say, there's a cup, or I can think what I like. No, it's very rigorous. You got to establish it first, define it, and then prove it. And then you have to look for the inherent holder of tea, the inherent amplifier of sound, and you won't find one. But it doesn't mean you won't find a microphone, and it doesn't mean you don't find a cup. But as Lama Zopa says, when you realize the emptiness of cup, tea holder, the emptiness of sound amplifier, it's as if there's no sound amplifier. It's as if there's no holder of cup. But there is. Dependent arising, there is. But what does exist is so subtle. It's as if it doesn't exist. That's a yogi telling us his experience, So emptiness can't contradict existence. That's demented. It can't. It reinforces it. In fact, they say things exist because they are empty. Something that isn't empty of independent existence, something that exists independently of parts and name, can't exist. See, that's where he argues. That's where he diverges from the Hindus. They do posit an intrinsic, permanent, inherent, independent energy called God. They do, even though they have karma, and they do posit an independent, inherent, intrinsic Atman. Christians call it a soul. So that's why Buddha would say that having a creator is not viable. It's a mistaken conception coming from ego grasping. Okay, that's an interesting point. Let's look at this one. The fact of the matter is, the Buddha would say, as you progress on your path of wisdom and compassion, you are able to actually manifest your mind as a cup, as another person. So you could argue that you are creating a cup. But the big difference is that if that piece of the four elements there that you manifest out of your mind is conjoined with that. So that's not a cup. It's a Buddha. I mean, if you're a Buddha, pretend if you're a Buddha. So there's a story about His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Lama Zopa told this story years ago about how, because you see, the lowest level bodhisattvas, and there's 10 levels, can already manifest their own mind in 100 different forms, meaning they have the capability to conjoin their mind with a set of four elements there, and there, and literally manifest as if it were that for the sake of sentient beings. So the story Rinpoche told, the time of the Tibetans when they first came out of Tibet, and the Tibetans, when they got to India, were all the old holy beings, and His Holiness so anxious to get land, to build monasteries, not to lose their knowledge, to pass on from the old minds to the younger minds, to keep the lineages alive. That was their main concern. So it seems like all these, in the early 60s, I don't know exactly the dates, having all these intensive discussions, His Holiness and his government, with the Indian government to try and negotiate to get land. So there's all this discussion about getting this land down south when it was just forest down in South India, hundreds of thousands of acres of forest. It's now like Tibet, you know. It's amazing. So they're negotiating. And some story like this, that His Holiness sent down from Dharamsala, which is like, you know, up in the sort of the Himalayan foothills. From Delhi, where the main government is, you'd take, you know, that was when we all started first going to India. You'd always take the train. There were no planes going up there. You'd drive or take a bus or take the train. You get the train to Pathankot, you climb out, get a taxi or a bus, and you go up the hill, up the top to McLeod Grange and Dharamsala. His Holiness was based. It gave him land up there, and a place up there to be. And that's when Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa started their second center up there in 1971, Tushita. It was the house of his own root guru. Fujang Rinpoche offered it to Lama, Tushita Meditation Center. So His Holiness had sent down his government minister down on the train down to Delhi to see the appropriate Indian minister. And at some point he couldn't get a meeting. He was really upset and stressed and went back up to Dharamsala. And His Holiness said something like, "It's okay, go right back down now." So he went back down and he had a meeting with the Indian minister. And on that day, it seems like the Indian minister's little boy was in the office with his daddy. And the little boy was talking to the Tibetan minister while he was waiting for his meeting. And he expressed the wish for a dog. Well, the Tibetan was delighted. He wanted to grease the wheels, you know, so he hopped outside to help. So he went outside. There was a sadhu who had a little dog. So he bought the dog from the sadhu and offered it to the little boy. And the little boy was happy. He ran to his daddy. Daddy's happy. Everything's happy. And everything works nicely. Whereas Lama Zopa says, you know, the dog and the sadhu were manifestations of the Dalai Lama's mind. So what I'm getting at is this. You could say then, oh, that's interesting. So they can create. But the big difference is this. That the Christian teachings say that God created me. So that means, from the Buddhist perspective, I am an extension of God. That means I am also God. Christians sort of talk like that, but then the fact that you can lose it, that's not possible. This is like an important discussions, you know. It will be not possible. If you can be God, God made me in His likeness, they say, and then He gave us free will, and somehow we were naughty and we ate the apple or whatever. You understand? I'm not being sarcastic. And then we became naughty. So we were oneness with God once, which has to mean we were pure, but then we lost it. Well, the Buddha's saying once you've achieved even realizing emptiness, forget about Buddhahood, it is impossible to lose it. You can't possibly lose it. It's impossible. It's like a joke. So that sadhu, that dog, that was the Buddha's mind, but pretending to be a dog. So he did indeed create a dog, but it's not separate from him. Do you see my point here? It's not separate. So you could argue Buddhas can create. They can create universes if they want, but it's just a manifestation of his own mind. Even Christians say that, but it's not. But you can never say you become God. You can't say that. Whereas the Buddha says every one of us can become an enlightened being. So he creates dogs and sadhus, and you can create cups and bridges and toilets and flowers. In other words, you conjoin your mind with the four elements and you appear like a flower. Easy peasy for the Buddha. They're doing it all the time. But that's not separate from the Buddha. That's the difference. Not creating something outside themselves. I find that helpful to understand. So the Buddha's saying whatever does exist, from Buddha down to the hell realms, if it exists, it can't exist without depending on something. It's interdependent. And why? You see, this is the trouble. We hear that, and it sounds very nice words. We like it. But then we have to ask the question, why is Buddha telling us that? You know what? It's because we think it is independent. But because it's such a subtle mistake, we are puzzled. We don't know what he means. You're grasping at an independent eye. It's just like a nonsense. We've never heard of such a thing. We are, but we don't see it because it's so pervasive, it's so utter. And that's the part that's difficult. If you're colorblind and only ever see purple, no one ever tells you anything else, and you never, it's not as if ever see blue, no, see yellow, let's say. And you've never, it's not, if for 5 minutes a day you saw the truth that it was purple, then you could tell yourself when you see yellow, don't believe it, Robina, it's not true. No, you only ever see it as yellow. So you believe it's yellow. That's exactly how our mistake is. It's so absolute and so utter. There's not a millisecond of space where we suddenly see the truth that we're interdependent. No. So to even hear that we grasp at an independent eye is like a joke. We don't even know what he's talking about. That's why when you start to look for the I, you have to first establish what you're looking for. It's so obvious. If I say to you, like I said before last week, please, I say to Nina, go get my iPad for me. I left it in the lounge. There's all these electronics there. But she has no idea what an iPad is. She can look for 47 years. She'll just be confused. You have to first establish what you think it is that you are looking for. So an iPad's easy because there can be such a thing. But the difficult part here is there can never be an independent I. Still, the teachings insist we have to establish first what we think, how we think the I appears to us. And that's incredibly subtle. Without that, how can you look? It's not possible. Not possible. You don't know what you're looking for. You don't know what you're looking for. And as Lama Yeshe says in Mahamudra, and it's logical, the second you can identify clearly what you think the I is, that is to say, a piece in here that's independent of the other bits, a piece that's independent of the mind labeling it that. Once you establish that second, you realize emptiness. In other words, when you finally know what the iPad is, what you're looking for, you look at all the electronics, and within a second you can establish either of two things. There is an iPad, in which case you give it to me and I thank you, or you will establish the absence of the iPad. Until you know what an iPad looks like, you can never establish whether there is one or isn't. The second you know what the intrinsic I would be if it did exist, that's the second you realize it doesn't exist, the emptiness of it. So therefore, the main job is to identify what we think the I is. You can't realize the emptiness until that, and just sit there watching space. It's ridiculous. Ask you some questions, please. Any questions, anybody? No. Anybody got questions on here? Nobody.
Venerable.
Who is?
Hi, I have a
Hello,
question.
sweetheart. Talk to me about it.
Thank you for the teaching.
Good.
Would you talk more about a Buddha manifesting as an inanimate object?
Talk more about how, in what way? You mean how it's possible?
How it's possible.
I mean, it seems to me if you've got the Vajrayana idea of the four elements, everything, matter exists, matter is a combination, matter is made of the four elements. You hear me? Can you hear that?
Yes.
Then each mind is also conjoined with its own set of the four elements. So therefore that mind that's enlightened can do what it likes. It just can grab any four elements anywhere and conjoin and manifest as a tree, manifest as a table. The four elements of a tree, the four elements of a table, the four elements of a body, just the same. No difference. There's no difference here. Same elements. Do you understand me? But this is conjoined with the mind. The table isn't, but a Buddha can manifest as a table. That means their mind will be conjoined with that table. That means there would be a Buddha, not a table, pretending to be a table. That's all. You see?
I see it. I guess I'm wondering why a Buddha would manifest as a chair.
To help sentient beings, dear. What are the reasons? There's no other reason. If a person needs a tree because they're hungry, a fruit, he'll manifest as an apple for you. How kind he is. They only do anything to benefit others, that's all. No other reason. Do you hear me? Did you hear that?
I do.
There's no other reason. Bodhicitta is the only reason. There's no other reason. It's to help sentient beings. Can you hear that?
I do. I can.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the Dalai Lama,
Thank
so
you.
that means, even the Dalai, so that's the thing. The dog looked like a dog. Dalai Lama looks like a human. He's not a dog and he's not a human. If he's a Buddha, he's not a human by definition. But to try and get that kind of ideas clear is very interesting. Do you hear my point, Barbara? A Buddha, a mind that is fully enlightened, doesn't need physical bodies. Can you hear that? This is the fruit of delusions, Barbara. Can you hear that? So when you finish delusions, you don't have any causes to have a body, do you? So your mind, when you're a Buddha, just pervades the universe, subtle, all pervasive, all knowing, all compassionate, all blissful, and all wise. That's what an actual Buddha is. That's the Dharmakaya. Do you hear me? But what drove you to be a Buddha is compassion. So Paul's peanut sentient beings can't communicate with a non-physical thing, so they kindly manifest in shapes and forms for us. So one of them is a human being, which is the Mr. Shakyamuni. That's the Nirmanakaya. And the supreme Nirmanakaya is the one that looks like a Buddha back 2,500 years ago. But Buddha's lowest level bodhisattvas are already able to manifest in 100 forms simultaneously. That's why they say you don't know who anybody is. You hear me? So that a Buddha technically is not a human by definition. So therefore, the dog is not the Buddha, nor is that human being. But they act like a human being. That's the best one, because they can talk to us and teach us. You understand? But the dog, that would have looked like a dog, it would have peed like a dog, it could even have been a mean dog. You don't go, oh, my dog's really a bodhisattva, it loves meditating. Don't be ridiculous. Of course it doesn't, it's like feeling nice. Are we communicating? Any questions? Anybody else? Huh? Nothing. Yeah, the hardest one is to understand what the I would be like if it were independent. We already believe it, but we can't articulate it because it's so close, you know, it's so intense, it's so utter us. So fascinating. Pretty fascinating. Well, we can see the symptoms of grasping at an independent I, and that's what's helpful. So the symptoms are having attachment. Attachment is the main voice of the ignorance that bleeds in the intrinsic I. And then aversion, all the others, they're all the expression of the belief in an independent I, an intrinsic I. You know. And what's interesting, they say it especially about ignorance, that its main energy is fear. Fear. But all the delusions have the flavor of fear. All of them, by definition. Why? And it sounds so abstract, is because they all believe in things that don't exist. So no wonder we're anxious and neurotic. No wonder we're never satisfied. No wonder we're grasping and frantic and desperate and angry and go crazy, because we're continually seeing everything as existing from its own side, and seeing everything through attachment as divine, and everything aversion as ugly, and all these fantasies in our mind, believing and trying to sustain this lies that we believe in. It's really intense, hard work. No wonder we're exhausted. So fear, this is fascinating. I mean, literally that story of Lama Tsongkhapa I always tell. A little boy, reincarnation of the previous yogi. There he was. He tells the story about how he was drowning. And he said, first he said, the head. It's one of the really good techniques that they all talk about when you're looking into your mind. You don't say, we say, I am angry, you know, I am attached. They say, there is attachment, there is anger, much more objective. So he said, the head kept coming to the surface for air. He was drowning. And then he said, the thought occurred to me. The person known as the Laudo Lama, not I, the person known as the Laudo Lama is about to die. And then he said, he described when he tells the story, and there was no fear. This is the sign of success. Look how when the smallest thing arises, that is what attachment doesn't want, which then triggers aversion, stubbing the toe. What is happening is you're having a panic attack. Anger, if you look at people who are really angry, they are literally having panic attacks. We say, oh, she's angry. Have a look at them, screaming, yelling, irrational words coming out of their mouth, completely hysterical. That's called having a panic attack. It's called fear. All the delusions are like that. That's why samsara is like a nightmare. We're always suffering, always worried, always anxious, because we're believing in things that don't exist. Not to the point, I mean, some people are extremely paranoid and literally believe that someone's going to kill them. That's extreme. But we're all like that to some degree. You believe that cake will make you happy. You see all these qualities in a person that just aren't there. That's delusional. Really being paranoid, yeah, it's a question of degree. That's all. Not kidding. That's how delusions work. And why they have fear is because what they believe in doesn't exist. So it's a bit like, I always think it's a simple example, again, like a $50 note. For so long, you've believed it's 500. You believe it, and you even see 500 now. So meaning you've built up this story, and every time then you get excited, you anticipate all the 500 worth, you go out to spend it. What's going to happen? Bitterly disappointed. Because what you thought it was, the value you thought, wasn't. So because you built up the anticipation. That's attachment energy. That's why it's multifaceted. Attachment, which is the main voice of the poor little pathetic I, needs something to make it feel full. So then it builds up a story. Believes the cake looks more delicious than it is, believes that person is more delicious than they really are, and having this and doing this and being this is going to make me happy. And then when that object or the person, let's say your boyfriend, doesn't do what your attachment wants, why do you think you're devastated? Because you believed in a lie. You built up a fantasy. It was worth 500. So we're building up this for eons, building up fear and distress and anxiety and disappointment 1,000,000 times a day. No wonder we're crazy. It's because of attachment, which is because of ego grasping. Because we believe in an intrinsic I. That's why I've got to go step by step. You can't just leap into emptiness. You've got to first control the servants of your crazy mind. Then you've got to control the crazy mind, the branch delusions. Now we're ready, by adding bodhicitta to the mix, to begin to understand dependent arising and emptiness, Wow. And the other important point is that actually emptiness, which is the sixth of the six perfections at the end of the bodhisattva path, is not a Mahayana teaching. Emptiness is a Hinayana teaching. Concentration is a Hindu teaching. But they're taught in the framework of the Mahayana path. And I've heard there's many things they say. For example, the bliss, that if you're just on the Hinayana path, your goal is to realize emptiness. So, of course, you need that technique. It's not Mahayana. If you realize, your Hinayana nirvana, you have to have emptiness. So how could it be Mahayana if you can use it then? It can't be. It's a Hinayana teaching. So they say that the goal, the difference is the goal. Anyway, they say the bliss, because once you realize emptiness on the Hinayana path, your goal for all those countless lifetimes is you must get out of samsara. You've got to get out of samsara. You've got to get out of samsara. There's no concept of bodhicitta there. So when you realize emptiness in this or that life, and when you die, you've cut all the causes of reincarnation, so you disappear into bliss. The Hinayanas even say you disappear altogether. Completely nihilistic. Nihilistic. Lama Tsongkhapa says even some of the Mahayana views say that. But as far as the Mahayana is concerned, Dalai Lama said one time, we Mahayanas have a problem with that view. You should just disappear into smoke. But they say, and one Lama said, so what happens is you go into bliss, subtle state of bliss once you realize your nirvana, whichever life it is. You're not on the Mahayana path, you're on the Hinayana path. You go into this incredible bliss, and it lasts for a long time. Then one day Buddha comes along and taps you on the shoulder. He says, okay, honey, it's about time you come out of this bliss, get on the Mahayana path and become a Buddha and help others. And this Lama said, to go out of that bliss is the worst suffering in the universe. It's interesting, isn't it? So the thing is, it seems like Tsongkhapa, I think all the Tibetans do that. They all teach the six perfections, the Mahayana path, and concentration and emptiness. Hinayana teachings are put as the last two. And it seems to me the reasoning is because once you start to focus on getting emptiness, once you start on experiencing bliss, you're going to forget all about sentient beings. I'm sorry. So this is why for this path, you get to renunciation after the second scope. You want to be revolted by the suffering and revolted by attachment and want to get rid of it. Then you go to the bodhisattva path. and you get bodhicitta. And now you won't forget. Now that bliss is no danger to you. And then you get onto the tantric path. You want bliss as quickly as possible because it's this brilliant, like rocket boost that it gives to your concentration that enables you to become a Buddha very, very quickly, only because you have unbearable compassion. Then the bliss doesn't disturb you. So then you get concentration. On the sutra path, you get concentration, emptiness at the end of the path, after bodhicitta. There's no danger of forgetting sentient beings then. That makes sense. It's easy to see that dependent arising proves emptiness, but it's hard to see it too. So when we think of emptiness, we tend to think, oh well, there's nothing anyway, so it's okay, it doesn't matter, sort of nihilism. But negativity is also empty. Hell is empty. Evil is empty. Psychopath is empty. So that means we have to mean, because as soon as we hear, oh, you mean there's no psychopath? Oh, phew. No, doesn't mean that. Not at all. Buddha's empty. So what's it mean? So a really simple example, is I find, for my mind, a negative action. Like if you look at how you have to create a negative action, we discussed this with karma roughly. 4 things in place to do an action that becomes what they call a complete action, which is one that drops a seed into your main bank vault, which is then one that brings you a type of rebirth, and then the other residual results, a complete action. So that in order for a killing action to be a complete action, it has to be 1, and I'm keeping it simple, 1, the object, a mouse. 2, the mind involved, intention to do it and motivation, anger. 3, you do the action. 4, the result, dead mouse, and you delight. That's, simply speaking, that's called a complete action of killing. So when we think of killing, we think of it as one thing, like a thing, kill. Oh, kill, look, there's kill. That person killed. It's like an intrinsic, it's like one action, kill. You're evil. But let's say there are 2 people, exactly the same scenario, 2 mice, 2 people, they look the same, and they suddenly go kill. But now let's look at their minds. 1 person, every component in both minds is the same. 1, there's an object. 2, there's intention. 3, there's a motivation. 3, they do the action. 4, they rejoice that the animal is dead. Exactly the same. You can't tell the difference. So what's the difference? 1 person, 1 piece is different only. In the mind involved, their motivation is compassion, and the other person's motivation is anger. And you can't tell by looking. It looks the same. Kill. 1 intense, 1 independent action. Kill. But 1 person's action, because the motivation was so pure, and let's say they even had wisdom and could see that it was beneficial for the animal, then not only did they not create a negative action, they hastened their Buddhahood. So where's the intrinsic action called killing? 1 component different. It's like you got a little construction and it's got 6 bricks in it, and you pull 1 brick out and put another brick in, it becomes a different thing. So those 2 actions that look identical, that look intrinsic, look absolute, killing, evil. No, they depend on arising on different components. 1 piece is different in 1 person's mind. 2 things, wisdom and compassion. And so that's the story about the Buddha killing that captain on a boat. The Hinayanas say that action was, there he is, a high-level bodhisattva. You can't tell. He's like a regular guy. He's a captain on a boat. He doesn't go to Halo. I'm a bodhisattva. Not like that. So he's got incredible clairvoyance. He sees 1 dude of the 500 merchants going to kill everybody. And he has unbelievable compassion for the dude. The 499 other people too, sure. But for the dude, because he's going to do a terribly heavy action, kill everybody and take everything for himself. And he would have unbearable suffering in all the lower realms for eons. His compassion was stupendous. So he thought, I'm going to stop him from doing that action by killing him, and then I will go to the hells instead. So the Hinayanas say there was still some negativity, though his motivation was good. You still got some negativity. But the Mahayana says, and this is one of emptiness, not a millimeter of negativity. Not only was it not negative, it was the most profound positive action that hastened his Buddha. So that proves emptiness. It doesn't have an intrinsic nature as killing or not. It was an action called killing. They're both an action called killing. because the pieces of them, they exist, each of them existed in dependence upon their different parts. The parts are different, the action is different, proving emptiness, proving dependent arising. Things aren't set in stone. So the fact of the matter is, it still doesn't contradict that killing is a negative action. Buddha says killing is a negative action. And then he says generosity is a positive action. Positive. That's a perfectly valid conventional statement. But nevertheless, you can be like, there's Nancy and she's rich and I want her money. I don't like it. I don't even like Nancy. But I'm all nice to her. I give her some money as a gift because I want her to give me her money. But that's an action of generosity. I gave her $20. But look at my motivation. There's no virtue at all. So therefore it's a negative action. Of course it is. That's why motivation is the key factor in determining anything we do, not the action itself. Even if you're deluded and you kill your little pussycat, because everybody on the West kills their pussycat because they think it's suffering and will stop its suffering. It's deluded. Compassion's not enough. You've got to have wisdom. You've probably sent for the poor pussycat to the frying pan and to the fire, and now in the lower realms. I mean, if you realize you did that, you'd be just absolutely devastated. We don't think of that. Oh, I meant well, we'll say. So fine, for you, not much negative karma because one component was different. If it were set in stone that killing is always wrong, then it would always bring negative results. That completely destroys any logic. Not possible. That proves emptiness. There's no intrinsic killing. It proves it. Buddha's action of killing with a pure motivation and hastening his own Buddhahood proves that killing is empty as well. Killing is also a dependent arising, which doesn't contradict that in general killing is wrong and in general generosity is good. No contradiction. Conventional reality is not contradicted by emptiness. It's reinforced by emptiness. Any questions, people? 1 o'clock? Yes, sweetheart.
So the Colorado potato beetle eats the
Beg your
leaves.
pardon?
The Colorado potato beetle eats the leaves of the potato plants, and then the plants get stunted and don't produce.
I'm sure the animals are very good at all that. Yeah.
So you have a field, like fields of these potato plants, and the beetles are coming, and you go and you smash the eggs, and if you've missed the hatching, then you smash the beetles themselves in order to protect the harvest.
I understand. So the question is?
So the question is, that kind of killing, is that you're not doing it because you're saving the Colorado potato beetle from committing an act.
Not you're doing it out of aversion to the potato, to the beetle, isn't it?
Correct.
Such a very heavy negative action.
Pardon?
It's a very heavy negative action. Of course it is. How can it be a positive action to squash a being with aversion? How can that be positive?
Well, how do you get around that?
By changing your mind. I mean, okay, this shows how life is difficult because we all know the world is like this. And little creatures get on with their job and they do what they do, This is really true. So this is really, really difficult. So this is where we have to really start to think about the meaning of dependent arising and how we start to create virtue. So that you put it this way, the Buddha's view is if you live in vows, many people in this life, it's not even high. I can say in this life, I've never yet met a situation in which I've been forced to kill. So that means, if some people have the karma to be have a potato field, and you've got the karma to meet many beings who like your potatoes, that's some karma of yours that you got with beetles. And then due to past habit to kill, you kill them. That's very personal karma. Not everybody has that situation. We've got to own the whole scenario. The fact that we've even, like being killing fish, you decide to be a fisherman. Not everybody tries to be a fisherman. You understand? So it's due to our past karma. So then we have to start thinking about it. And it might mean you've got to give up growing potatoes in Colorado. I don't know. If you don't want to kill, you've got to decide your priorities. You've got to decide your priorities, in other words. That's what it's showing us.
Right. But if you're eating the potatoes, you can almost always assume that.
What, darling?
if you choose to eat potatoes,
yes.
like this is very common,
Yes.
that you're eating a crop that requires,
Every single person's food on this planet is like that. I
right,
mean, every single, I mean, even the best, you know, one, like a wheat field in Victoria, I remember in Melbourne, near Melbourne, some vegan. I was just telling, always tell this story when I was in England one time, and I was in this cheese shop, and I had a picture of me on Facebook, and I was buying this kick-ass cheddar, right? So then these fundamentalist vegans and vegetarians got very upset. How dare a Buddhist nun eat cheese, you know? So I didn't want to be fundamentalist or political. So I thought about, so I put some stories just in response. And one of them was, I always wondered how many bugs got killed on the road. But sure enough, you Google it, some Dutch dude has done the research, and just on the number plate per car, per whatever, it's like trillions of sentient beings get slaughtered. When we breathe, our body is a zoo. We're breathing in billions of beings. Our mouth is like an entire ecosystem. Under here is like a zoo. Just the very nature of samsara is we are destroying just by existing. So what to do? Oh, that's not the other story, because then the bloke answered and said, oh, that's just, you can't help that, he said. Because we're so attached to food, you see. If you eat it, then you're a murderer. If you don't eat it, it doesn't matter. It's just so crazy. So the other story was, in this wheat field, you know, in this off-season, all these little mice, field mice, millions of them. This guy, the scientist, and he had pictures of them. He said they were cute. They sang love songs to each other. And what do you think you're going to have to do when you grow the wheat? And who's the wheat for? Sure, 20% for the bulls, but the 80% for the holy vegans and vegetarians. And they slaughter them. So we can't avoid, this is the reality of life. So what can we personally do is make some decisions that I don't want to do my best not to harm sentient beings for the very first reason that I don't want future suffering. I even don't want to get born in a future life where I'm forced to be a potato grower in Colorado. You get my point here? This is all dependent arising on our karma. So we have to get ourselves out of all this and make decisions and maybe decide to live in vows and maybe give up vegetables, you know, and then when you do eat food, you know beings have died. So you have to change your whole way of seeing the world. Do you understand? It's a slow process, but it's all to do with prioritizing what you want your mind to become, a non-harming or a harming person. It doesn't mean it's easy.
right. And the other thing is you can hire someone to squash the beetles.
Well, of course, but that's worse. That's worse. That's worse because you intend to kill, but let the people do the messy job. That's worse.
Right. Huh, okay.
That's appalling.
Because anyway.
I mean, you're a farmer of potatoes in Colorado. Well, you just happen to grow.
No, they're everywhere in the whole United States.
But this is
If I was
everywhere
growing
on the planet, sweetheart. This is
if I was growing potatoes here, there'd be Colorado potato beetles, or in Massachusetts, or in, they're everywhere.
This is everywhere, everything. This
Right.
is the unfortunate part of our world. So we've got some choices to make. It's very difficult. And that's why knowing when you eat your plate of food that sentient beings have died, whether it's a lamb chop or a vegetable, you then have to recognize this, try to have compassion, bless it, do what we can to redeem our karma. Be very conscious as much as we can and avoid as much as we can doing actions that harm others. Because karma is all to do with what's in your mind.
Right. So I avoid growing potatoes now because wherever I live, because I don't want to kill those things.
Perfect. Totally perfect.
But is it fair to eat potatoes knowing that someone else had to do that?
No, but fair is, you see, we like to find a way to blame. Fair is this kind of vindictive sort of, oh, well, I get away with it. I just don't bother doing it. No, it's not a question of that view. If that's your view, then it's heavy. Let other people get it. I get off the hook.
Right.
No, it's not like that. The world is interdependent, and the very fact of existing, I harm others. That's the nature of the suffering samsara. So within that, we do what we can to be as virtuous as we can. So when you do eat your food, that you know is the result of the death of many beings, you try to have compassion, you blow on the food, you offer, you do what you can within this crazy world we live. That's all you can do. It's not a question of fair. If you want to stop eating food, then stop eating food. But you're still going to breathe in creatures. It's just levels and levels of sentient beings. And then you have compassion. You have compassion. And you try to redeem your actions because we have to eat, because we're, deluded. It's not a question of getting away or fair or unfair. It's not a question of that. Understand me? or not?
Yeah, it's just that once a Geshe told me that when he realized he was growing potatoes, and when he realized that he'd have
Kill the beetles.
with those bugs, he's like, well, I just don't grow the potatoes. And I said, but you eat them? And he says, yes. And I'm like, that's not fair.
I know, but I've given you another interpretation.
Yeah. Okay.
Do you understand?
I'm just always curious about that one.
I know, exactly, darling. It's a really important question. And it's not just the potatoes, it's everything, all the food we eat. That wheat, you know. I mean, the billions of beings who die, or even what they do to little male chicks. You know what they do to little male chicks in the factories? Because you don't need, male chicks are useless.
Yeah.
When they see it's a male, it goes into this machine. It's just popped out of its egg, and it's just smashed and cut into a million pieces. Billions of them, these little male chicks, you know, into this machine that slaughters them. You see pictures of it, you see in the videos, you know, oh, there's a male chick, so slaughter it. I mean, it shows the deludedness that we have. We don't think it's, now they begin to change it, and now they're having some compassion for the male chicks, you know. The whole world is, this is how the world is.
If you wanted to like redeem yourself, I mean, it's not, I know that's probably the wrong word, but is there like a prayer you would say, or
the things you can do.
any of like the purification?
Mantras, but you do purification every day. And this is why, that's when we start to understand the four opponent powers and the purification practice. And this is dependent arising. When you strongly live in vows not to kill, and you purify every day your tendency to kill, then you won't even have to ever meet a situation in which it would even arise for you to kill. And you might even have to eat much food where many beings have died, perhaps. You won't meet that scenario, because every scenario we meet is due to our past karma, you know. So by purifying and living in vows, you lessen that opportunity. You understand? Yeah. It's not easy, it's extraordinary, and it shows the depth of the suffering of this planet. Just by breathing, we harm others. Yes, someone else. I'm going to go home soon.
There's a question
Yeah.
online.
Who's that? Joey, yes, sweetheart. Yes, Joey.
Hello, Venerable. Can you hear me okay?
I can definitely hear you, Joey.
Okay, good. I'm using a different speaker today to listen to you.
Good.
I work in a meat and seafood department at a market, and
Okay.
I have been gone since I've started studying the Tibetan Buddhism on medical leave. I go back next Tuesday.
To work there. What do you do there? What's the department that you work in? What do they do there?
Meat and seafood. What I do is I get
live
people,
fish there. Are there live fish in a
nothing live.
Okay. So you can walk around,
live.
sneaking around, saying mantras and blowing on them. Don't do it too nakedly; they'll get upset. But you can go around and blow mantras and bless all these creatures. Lama Zopa says even a bone that's 1,000 years old, because of the power of the karmic connection of the mind that lived in that body and where it is now. And then secondly, the power of mantra. Just by saying mantra, you bless your breath, and you bless, and the sentient being whose body that was even 1,000 years ago will get the benefit.
Okay. Where can I find that?
Huh? Any mantra at all. Om Mani Padme Hum.
Any mantra at all? Okay.
Any mantra.
So
Om Mani Padme Hum, the mantra of compassion. Anything at all, sweetheart.
Okay, wonderful. So it's actually a positive thing then. Like,
well, yeah, I mean, you can make it. This is the thing. Redeem. You can make it positive. You can have lots of. There's a book coming out soon. We're not quite sure who's going to publish it. But Rinpoche years ago asked one of his students in Melbourne, who used to cook for him, to do a recipe book. And the reason is just so he can do all these, full of little quotes, you know, and there's little cute koala giving little talks about compassion when we eat vegetarian, and it's to encourage people to eat vegetarian. It's cute. It's the cutest little book. So just to help people think this way and bless the animals, and remember that even when you eat vegetarian, creatures have died. Just to help us get compassion, you know, be aware of interdependence, aware of this suffering planet.
okay.
So yeah, blow mantra on them, but don't be too obvious. I'll sack you.
Sure. Yeah, it won't be too obvious at all. Wow. All right. Thank you very much.
Okay,
Thank you.
Okay. Who else? Time to go. Nothing, people. I'm ending early. I'm sorry. But maybe there's enough.
I have a question.
Who's that?
This is Tanya.
Tanya, talk to me, sweetheart. Talk to me.
So I've often thought about this. I work in a water department. Okay.
Get a bit closer
And
to the microphone, Tanya. Would you a bit clearer to the microphone?
all right, I work in the water department of my town. Is
Which
that better?
department? Which department?
Water.
Water department. What's a
Water.
water department?
Yes. Water department. So there are times that people are not able to pay their bills. And I, as a bill person, send the technicians to shut their water off.
Oh, I
So
see
they
what you mean.
have no water.
That's
Am
what happens if
I
you mean that's what happens if they don't pay their bills. Is that what you're saying?
correct?
And you have to do that, do you?
Yes.
What do you feel about that?
I feel horrible, but
That's right.
that's my job.
I
And
know.
I've often thought,
So what's the thinking you're putting into this? Are you thinking you should change your job, or what are you thinking as a result of this?
I have often lately thought that maybe I should change my job.
This is the difficult part, isn't it? Like just say you're born in a family that does fishing and you go fishing every day, and then you start to think about it. We've got some choices to make. It's not easy, is it? I mean, so it's like if you can, it would be good for you because you don't want to harm others and you don't want to be the cause of somebody else not having water and poor people suffering. But you also got to be reasonable and see if it's possible and look around. But meanwhile, while you are in the job, you just have to really have a strong wish not to harm others and be regretful that you have to harm them. So have an attitude of compassion until you decide you might have another job. You understand? I'm sort of do it with compassion. At least have
I
that.
do. I apologize for the noise. I'm outside. I apologize. Just 1 second. Oh, here we go.
It's very interesting. So just think about it every day. Be brave. And that's really good that you should talk about it. Thank you, Tanya. Thank you, sweetheart.
So have compassion. Compassion.
I think at least try and be aware of it and have compassion and then feel I wouldn't want anyone to do that to me, So may I stop having to do this to make people suffer. Have a really strong and strongly wish to find a better job where you can be of help to people. Do you understand, darling?
Yes, I do. Thank you. Thank you so much.
So I think it's enough today. Enough today. Enough food for thought. So we think it's gone like a dream. Look at an hour and 20 minutes, like 1 second ago we started. Suddenly an hour and 20 minutes has come. So we dedicate all these thoughts we've had, these seeds we planted, how marvelous. If anything has become a bit clearer, I hope so. Then we continue to practice, control our body, control our speech, control our mind, and get bodhicitta and realize emptiness and get that, and then be of benefit to others. Stop suffering and get benefit to others. Dangchub. Semchog, Rinpoche, Ma Ke Panam, Ke Guchig. That's the other one first. So I'll do this one first. Dewa Di, Nudu Dug. Lama Sangye Drubgyone, Drawa Chikyang Malupa, Dei Sala Gurpa Shog. Then the other one. Thank you. May the Supreme Jewel Bodhicitta. That's right. Go back. Supreme Jewel Bodhicitta. Go back. Previous one, you just had it. There it is. May the Supreme Jewel Bodhicitta that has not arisen in the minds of others arise and grow. And may that which has arisen in minds not diminish, but increase more and more. And then the next one, yep. Swift prayer, that's good. Swift prayer. That's it. Okay. Maybe put it up on the top so we can all see it. Put it on that's it. Peerless teacher and assembly of the children of the victorious ones, Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas, victorious Lozang, father and sons, along with the lineage masters, all the objects of refuge in infinite lands. Please bestow the virtue and goodness of accomplishing this prayer here and now. Holding and spreading the Muni's teachings through explanation and practice, you wore the armor of patience that is never discouraged. Incomparable, venerable Guru, to you make this request. While striving single-pointedly for the sake of the victorious one's teachings, the sole gateway through which all benefit and happiness emerge, and from other living beings, you suddenly departed to peace. Such a great loss. Nevertheless, through the undeceiving truth of the blessings of the ocean of the three jewels and the great waves of bodhicitta of the children of the victorious ones, may the smile of a reincarnation swiftly beam in glory for fortunate disciples. And the prayer for His Holiness. He keeps telling us all the time now he's living for 20 to 30 years. Have you heard those stories? Oh, you can't believe. Even one he had in Dharamsala last year when Lama Tsongkhapa passed away and there was a big long life puja, he told all the Westerners afterwards, it was so intense, they didn't translate it properly. He said, Palden Lama, you heard of Palden Lama? This wrathful female protector who's a very close connection with Tibet and with His Holiness. He said he had this vivid dream in which Palden Lama plucked him out of a sea of blood, because Palden Lama sits on a mule in a sea of blood. He plucked him out. She plucked him out of the sea of blood and said, "You're going to live for another 20 to 30 years." Isn't that good? It's amazing. He keeps telling. Recently, he said, "Trust me," he said. And he keeps saying it. He's going to be like 120. Can you imagine? He's determined to wait until the Chinese collapse, I think. It's very funny. Anyway, we hope he lives long. The wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit happens in the world. To the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. Goodbye.